Let's talk about the different types of technologies that are used to fingerprint and identify different types of content. What kinds of technologies are used to identify unwanted content today? We can think about content fingerprinting in terms of a number of different classes of methods. Hash-based, which typically is used to perform an exact match against a known type of content. Spectral fingerprinting, that takes a fingerprint of some analog aspect of the information, such as tones or frequencies in an audio file. And perceptual hashing, which is like a hash except has the quality that two similar pieces of input generate two similar hashes. If you're familiar with cryptographic hashes, that type of concept, of course, sounds a little bit foreign because typically two different pieces of content are intended to produce two completely different cryptographic hashes, even if the original content is similar. And so perceptual hashing is effectively a different type of hashing that has effectively the opposite quality. Hash-based fingerprinting has a number of widely used applications. One of them is in a product called PhotoDNA, whereby it's possible to take a photographic image and compare that photo against a very large database of known photographs. This particular application has been used in the so-called NCMEC photo database, which is a photo database maintained by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, to detect the use of photographs that are known to be that of missing and exploited children. Hash-based fingerprinting is effective in this case because there is a database of known content, that is, the photos of those children. And so it's easy to check whether something that's previously been unseen matches against a finite set of known images. Another type of fingerprinting that can be used to match against a database of known content is so-called spectral fingerprinting. Here, the idea is that rather than comparing a hash of the bits of a particular file, you might actually perform signal processing on the content and generate a fingerprint according to the spectral or frequency-related properties of that particular audio file. This particular approach is commonly used in copyright enforcement. If there's a particular file being shared on BitTorrent and somebody wants to know whether the file being shared matches against copyrighted content, one can perform a so-called spectral fingerprint against part or all of that audio file and then compare that fingerprint against one that exists in a larger database of known copyrighted content. This particular approach has the advantage that because it's based on the audio properties of the file, it's robust to small changes in the file, including things like clipping or excerpting portions of the file. EchoPrint is an open source system that performs this type of spectral fingerprinting. And you can see the processing pipeline here. One starts with an audio file, removes various noise from the file, then converts the file into the frequency domain and decomposes it into different frequency bands, so one can see the coefficients that might exist in different frequency bands. This is then combined with the temporal aspect, and so the fingerprint consists of when specific frequencies show up in the file at which particular times in the file. The combination of the frequencies and the times at which those appear in the file are then used as input to produce the hash. Note that those kinds of properties can be preserved even if a file is clipped at the end or excerpted. It's also effective when comparing things like live recordings against studio recordings. Both hash-based and spectral fingerprinting have various limitations. First of all, they only work on certain types of media. They're based on a database of known fingerprints, and so you have to know what you're looking for in order to be able to perform that match or ask that question about whether a piece of content is matching some known piece of offending content. In some cases, the content can be modified to evade the hash database. And finally, all of this lacks context. So if we were interested in an application that was more nuanced than copyright or the detection of photos used in trafficking, we might rely on some more sophisticated statistical techniques. Perceptual hashing is a different type of hashing, whereby similar content produces similar hashes. The idea here is if I have a piece of content that I want to identify, and there's a potential that that content might be modified, then I might want to use a hash that has the property that two similar pieces of content produce similar hashes. This kind of hash can be useful in detecting certain types of images or content in scenarios where a particular image might be modified slightly, and yet still I might want to detect all images that bear a certain level of similarity to the original. Perceptual hashing works roughly as follows. The image is converted to grayscale and then downsampled. In particular, we make it smaller. It's then converted into the frequency domain, and structural properties of the image, in other words, low frequency components, are separated from the detailed information or the higher frequency components. And then those transform coefficients are preserved. So in some ways, it is similar to spectral fingerprinting in that both operate in the frequency domain. But perceptual hashing tries to preserve various aspects of images that capture the structural properties of the image, as opposed to details that might change if the image is slightly altered. In summary, there are three general classes of content fingerprinting algorithms: hash-based fingerprinting, which relies on exact matches; spectral fingerprinting, which operates in the frequency domain, often on audio files; and perceptual hashing, whereby similar pieces of content produce similar hashes. In general, all of these techniques rely on having access to a database of known content against one might wish to match to detect a potentially offending piece of content. In more nuanced applications, such as the detection of hate speech, terrorist speech, bullying, disinformation, and other types of content that we may wish to moderate, these techniques are less useful because for those classes of content, there isn't always a database of known or previously seen content that we're trying to identify or match against.